Hey guys, this is your High Fist here with another short but juicy video. We are continuing our sort of discussions on military strategy in the 10 big books. And what I thought would be a fun topic for us to touch on today would be a sort of a Mount Rushmore of military strategists in the books. And what would be even more fun for me is once you're done with this video, if you could sort of maybe give me your Mount Rushmore, right? Who do you think are the top four military sort of strategists in the series? It could be the larger Malazan books or just the 10 big books, right? It doesn't make a difference to me. I just thought it would be fun. So let's go backwards. In terms of a top four, at number four, I would put Coltane. So Coltane, even though he only appears in one book, he obviously has a big impact on the story, and he has his entire arc has a big impact on most readers, right? And even though he's not a particularly three-dimensional character in terms of his own personality and all that, just in terms of strategy and the war and the entire set piece of the Chain of Dogs, that's one of my favorite bits of military fantasy ever. Almost all, in fact, not almost, all the engagements, when I was reading it, were pretty clear, pretty easy to follow. And just the way that these tens of thousands of refugees are essentially walking from one end of a continent to another, and the fact that Coltane is just vastly outnumbered by so many different entities who would just like to annihilate that refugee group moving from point A to point B, just the way he used the Wiccans, and you know what, adding to sort of Coltane's I guess credibility as a leader and a strategist, let's not forget that Coltane was also someone who sort of united the Wiccan tribes together, right? Even though the real life parallel between this character and Coltane in terms of their personality is nothing sort of they're nothing like each other, but T.E. Lawrence, right? Based on whose life one of my favorite movies, Lawrence of Arabia, was made. T.E. Lawrence, to a certain extent, was, even though in this case he was an outsider, but he's credited by many for not only uniting many of the Arab tribes under the sort of guidance of Prince Faisal, but he was also credited with sort of bringing counterinsurgency and insurgency back into the Arab way of fighting, particularly when they were taking on the Turks. And Coltane kind of does that with the Wiccans, if you think about it as well, and with his larger forces. Coltane trained them in counterinsurgency, and Coltane made sure that they were all prepared for sort of guerrilla warfare, irregular warfare type tactics, and it becomes so important in the Chain of Dogs because it's essentially the practice that Coltane had made them undergo in terms of guerrilla warfare that gave that entire group the ability to protect those refugees from one end all the way until they actually get to Aran. You could argue that Coltane maybe should be disqualified from this because ultimately he lost. Ultimately, the sort of the series of campaigns between him and Cobol Doom, you could argue, ended up with Coltane losing, with Coltane being killed, right? However, once again, I will refer to the point that Mattock made in House of Chains to Felicin, who's Shaikh at the time, that they had 9 engagements in the Chain of Dogs. Cobol Doom just won the last one, and even for that, he required a lot of magic, he required a lot of betrayal and things like that, because he is hot iron, while Coltane is cold iron. So Felicin was like, but if cold iron almost always wins, then why is it that Coltane lost? And Mattock says, but he just lost the last one, right? But every engagement before that in the Chain of Dogs was a victory for Coltane, was a victory for cold iron. So Coltane would be number 4 for me. Number 3, even though we don't really see him doing a lot in terms of military strategy, I would still like to put Shadow Throne / Celevan there, right? Because the type of strategy we see from Shadow Throne is not particularly military strategy per se, right? It's more of the kind of 3D chess type thing that Erickson sometimes does with his characters as well. So we've seen other people do that. So Rake, for example, and the entire Dragnipur, Hood, Dasim thing and all that, you could argue that it was all a big masterful stroke of genius and a great example of strategy and things like that, right? Tihol we see doing a lot of really cool disruptive strategic things, but I didn't really want to sort of bring that into the ambit of what we were discussing today, because I wanted it to sort of purely focus on military strategy. However, if you combine both the Shadow Throne and the Kelvin characters, I think you could make a pretty good case that he belongs there in the Mount Rushmore of strategists. I also wanted to put him there because, in my opinion, he's hot iron. He's one of the few examples of actual hot iron that you can put on a Malazan Mount Rushmore for strategy, because you could argue Cotillion Light Dancer is cold iron, who kind of complements Shadow Throne's hot iron, but just the way they keep improvising and the way they keep adapting, right? Because with the other, at least with Coltrane and with the person that we will see after this, they're both extremely calculating and strategic, and they have everything planned out, and they always have some sort of plan B that they kind of can pull out in times of need. Shadow Throne, on the other hand, relies, or in my interpretation of the character at least, seems to rely a lot more on improvisation, manipulation, right, and just rolling with the punches. He has an end goal, right, but he's not really the type of person to sit there and lay it all out like a mastermind in intricate detail. He's more like someone who has an end goal in mind, and he just happens to be extremely spontaneous and creative, and therefore he keeps improvising. Because when we read the 10 books, it almost seems like they keep switching allegiance, right? In the first book, he wants to kill Ganos Paran. In the last book, everybody's on the same side, and the insinuation is even that Tavor was working for Shadow Throne and Cotillion the entire time. There are some times where he seems to be on the side of I mean, there wouldn't be any good guys or bad guys, I guess, but you know what I mean. There are some moments where he seems to be on Quick Ben's side. There are some moments when he seems to want to be against him, and yet he manages to outwit a lot of these characters. In the Bone Hunters, Shadow Throne completely sort of outplays Quick Ben, which is how he then uses Quick Ben to fight Icarium and things like that. And then in Reaper's Gale, he sends Quick Ben once again to find the refugium, right? And Quick Ben meeting the Dragon Sisters and all that. That entire thing, it's people keep talking about the sort of the end game that Shadow Throne and Cotillion have. I personally don't think Shadow Throne and Cotillion themselves knew really what their exact end game would be. They knew they wanted to sort of free the crippled god, but I think they just used what they could. They used Iskar al-Pust, they used the Paran brother and sister, they just used a number of different entities as much as they could. They used Casa, right, as much as they could to get what they want. And in that sense, I would say Shadow Throne sort of deserves his place on the Mount Rushmore of military strategists for his improvisational abilities, and also because of what he's achieved, right? I mean, come on, the guy sort of was a mortal who ascended into a god, and even though he was hot iron, he essentially surrounded himself with cold iron, right? Dancer, Dasim, you could even argue that Lassin and Teshren are all cold iron. So I would certainly put Calivant up there. Number two, the character whom a lot of people would probably put at number one, which is Tavor, right? Tavor Paran. Tavor Paran is, at least in terms of hype and all that, hands down the best military strategist in the series. When she was a kid, her father used to sort of bring the best generals and sort of military strategists and experts and all that, and they would have these little dolls or figures or whatever, and they would just simulate warfare like a chess game, and Tavor would just kick their asses one after another, one after another. And this is when she was just a child. I think this is when she was like 10. When she was 10 or 11, she was already defeating the greatest military strategist that her father could bring, right? And One of my favorite sort of Tavor moments is a moment with Tavor not even there. It's a conversation between two folk relations, brother Aloft and sister Purity or something like that, right? I can't remember their exact names, but it's towards the end of the Cripple God, and they're like, is like the female folklore sale says, is it just me, or does it look like all of these disparate engagements all over the place? uh, does it seem to you too that all of this is being guided by one singular mind? And brother Alof says, no, you're absolutely right. This kind of this looks like grand strategy. That's the exact word he uses, right? This is like all of these different engagements, right down to the last soldier. Everything was planned out to draw out our forces, the Folkrul Assail forces, because of course the Folkrul Assail forces are much bigger in number, right? Not only was it done to draw us out, but we are constantly reacting. We are not, whoever's planned this out is not allowing us to be proactive at all. We're just reacting. And if you look at that, if you relive that entire sort of battle scene, which spans essentially the entirety of the last book, you will sort of see that the Folklore army, even though they keep winning and even though they're just much bigger and stronger and larger, it's our guys, the quote unquote good guys, who are dictating the pace of the battle in many ways, while the Folklore are simply forced to kind of respond to it. And I mean, finally, putting down the sword in the barrow and all that. Tavor, without a doubt, deserves her place as either the second best or the best military strategist in the series. And that brings me to my number one. This will be a bit of a controversial pick because many people do not like this character. In fact, I think it would be fair to say that many people hate this character, right? But, I mean, once again, let me just give it a shot, right? Leoman of the Flails. Why do I say that? It's because, remember, all of these things that I listed out about Tavor, about how sort of beatable she is, and how at the age of 10 she sort of outsmarted and outmaneuvered the best in the world. Who is the one person who has outsmarted Tavor? Who is the one person who has actually defeated Tavor in a battle of wits when it comes to actual armed conflict, right? It's Leoman of the Flails, and he's cold iron as well. And in House of Change, I think I've mentioned this before, there's even a sort of scene where Felicine is kind of panicking because they're all hot iron, and she realizes that they're in bad shape because she knows Tavor, and she knows that Tavor's cold iron, and she's like, so do we have anyone in our group who's cold iron? And Mathog just says, yes, we do, a Leoman of the Flails. And just that entire thing at Yucatan, drawing them into the city, right? Blowing the entire city up, essentially, even though it is probably the most immoral and unethical piece of military strategy that we see in the 10 big books, it's also, you could argue, the most effective. And when you take emotions out of it from a purely strategic perspective, the most brilliant thing that anybody's done in the series, because it just takes, there's no way that even a person like Tavor could have expected it. It was believable because when Erikson wanted to do this, when Erikson wanted Tavor to kind of have a setback like this and then go back and get her ties severed with the Malazan Empire and Leslie and all that, the way in which she was defeated had to be brilliant enough and cunning enough for us as readers to forgive Tavor, in the sense that we still see her as this unbeatable strategist, right? That's a very hard thing to do. But Erikson manages to do it because of the way that he describes the sort of, the lights and the people and just the fire and all that. That entire Yucatan thing, anybody who's read the Bone Hunters will know what I'm talking about, right? That's probably the most legendary chapter in all 10 books, and the build up to it. And even when you go back and read Leoman's character, you can see that Erikson has been dropping these hints here and there. In Deadhouse Gates, he comes across much more as a loyal follower of the Whirlwind. But once you get to House of Chains, and particularly in the Bone Hunters, you can just see from his sort of, from the way he's always at a distance, right? Kind of like Tavor is as well. You can tell that Ericsson is really building up to this cold iron bit, and that the entire Bone Hunter crew would have been completely decimated, right? If it wasn't for strokes of luck here and there. Who else can claim that? Who else in the entire series, from the most powerful gods to the most despicable villains, who else can say they outsmarted and outmaneuvered Tavor in a battle? No one else. Leoman is the only one, which is why I would put him as my final entry into the Mount Rushmore of military strategy, and why I think he deserves the title of being the best. Listen, when the champion is defeated, the challenger who wins is crowned the new champion. That's how I see it, right? Tavor is without a doubt the sort of the heavyweight champion of military thinking in the 10 big books, and the fact that Tavor was defeated by Leoman makes him the best in my book, right? This is of course not to say that I think what he did was right, what he did was morally acceptable. That's not what I'm saying at all. Simply that if I had to purely look at it from a strategic perspective, he would be the top dog because of book 6 and because of what he did in Yucatan. So that's my Mount Rushmore, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, right? If you disagree, let me know as well. I'm sure many of you will disagree as well. So tell me what you think of the sort of this Mount Rushmore idea, and who would be your top 4 military strategists. See you guys.